I'd like to talk with you about Scrum. And in talking about Scrum, I have sort of three views of it I'd like to share with you, starting with the Scrum values, and then looking at the overall Scrum framework, and then finally checking in with what we call sort of the rule of three about Scrum. So we start with the Scrum values because they guide everything else about what we do with Scrum. And those 5 values are respect, openness, courage, focus, and commitment. It's important to understand these because Scrum expects us to do continuous improvement and inspect and adapt on our practices. And the values guide us on when we're letting go of a practice, are we abandoning a value? Or when we bring in a practice, is it evidence that we're embracing the value? So with the values in our pocket, as it were, in our toolbox, let's look at the Scrum Framework. Scrum Framework starts with a product backlog that's been prioritized by the product owner. So there are items or features or stories, whatever you want to call them, that have rank and information that the product owner has gathered from stakeholders, from technical people, wherever. With that, we move into the first meeting in Scrum, which is called the Sprint Planning Meeting. And the Sprint Planning Meeting has the development or delivery team in attendance. It's facilitated by the Scrum Master, and we also create dialogue with the product owner. And in this meeting, the intent is to create commitment around the time box, or what we call sprint, in order to deliver what's referred to as a potentially shippable product increment. So the work in the sprint planning meeting is to look at these ranked items in the product backlog, discover what the estimates of effort of work would be to deliver the items, and look at how much team capacity is available so that they could then commit given the risks or challenges they've identified, and also looking at what their definition of done would be for that potentially shippable product increment. Given the commitment, we now have a sprint plan and we move into the time box. In the Rally tool, by the way, you'll notice that we refer to that as the iteration and the iteration plan. In Scrum, we just use sprint and sprint plan. So within the sprint, there's a daily check-in, a cadence of how are we doing, and that's called either the daily Scrum or the daily stand-up. This is a 15-minute meeting where the intent is to check in with how are we doing on our commitment that we made in the sprint planning meeting. And so in the 15-minute meeting, team members go round robin and check in with, what have I completed of my commitment for yesterday? What can I complete of a commitment today? And what's getting in my way of meeting commitments? This helps everybody in the team inform one another about how they can work with one another with regard to the tasks that they created during the sprint planning meeting in order to deliver the items from the backlog by the end of the time box. Now at the end of the time box, we have the third meeting, the sprint demo and review meeting. Here we again have the entire delivery team, facilitated by the Scrum Master and also attended by the product owner. We also invite stakeholders to be there to witness the doneness of these features or items that were committed to in the sprint backlog. And so in the demo, we show the features and we review some of the quantitative data around what it took to deliver the features. You can also add in a notion of the team reflecting or retrospecting along with or after the sprint demo and review meeting. And so at the end of the time box, the intent is to have a potentially shippable product increment. And that means that it's not necessarily always released, but if the product owner chose, then it could be released. So with that framework, there's kind of a nice way of thinking about it, which we call the rule of three. There are 3 roles defined in Scrum. the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the delivery team or development team. Now I also add in a fourth role that I've spoken about here, and that's the stakeholders. So you can think about them also kind of sneaking in there. They're a big part of how we figure out what's the highest ranking stuff. They keep us informed. The second in the rule of three is the 3 ceremonies, and I've spoken about those in the framework. They are the sprint planning meeting, the daily stand-up or scrum, and the sprint demo and review meeting. And then I also sneak in that fourth possible ceremony we refer to as the sprint retrospective. Again, the difference between the demo and review and sprint retrospective is the demo is more about what's been delivered and the data around that, and the retrospective is more about the team agreements, the team processes, and what's working well, and what new things I'd rather add in. And then finally, the third in the rule of three is the 3 artifacts. And these are the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and then what's helping us stay on track in the sprint, the burn down chart, tracking every day what's left to do. And again, you can think about a fourth item, which would be that potentially shippable product increment, the actual software. So here we've gone through the values of Scrum. It's 5 values that guide us in how we use the Scrum Framework and inject practices or inspect and adapt practices, and then the rule of 3 around ceremonies and roles and artifacts. Thank you.